this short video, I'll explain the constraints of importing an Ekahau project into DNAC. Walk you through examples of anchor points. Okay, how do we choose an anchor point? The choice of anchor point clearly depends on the plan that you have in mind for your enterprise. A floor, like I said, can never be an anchor point for the reasons I stated earlier. Is that if a floor could be an anchor point, then it would mean that we can extend the site hierarchy beneath a floor, which is not possible in DNAC. A building can be an anchor point for your Ekahau project if the following two conditions are satisfied. First, that the Ekahau project that you are seeking to import comprises only of floor areas. There are no buildings in that. Second, that the hierarchy embedded in the Ekahau project is reflected underneath the building. What I mean by this is that if your Ekahau project contains floor F1 and F2, then the building under which you are seeking to import the Ekahau project should contain at least a placeholder floors F1 and F2. If they are missing, then the matching would fail and import will also fail. A site can be an anchor point too, under the conditions that the project that you're seeking to import comprises only buildings. Now, if you had a Ekahau project which had floors at the top level, you cannot import it under a site in DNAC because site cannot be a parent of a floor in DNAC site hierarchy. Second, the hierarchy embedded in the Ekahau project should be reflected beneath the site. Now, you can understand this by extrapolation from the example of the building, but I'll presently illustrate with the actual example. So now let's go ahead and take examples of incorrect imports which would fail and a couple of examples of correct import. Now, this is an attempt to import an Ekahau project containing one floor beneath the floor. Now, GUI does not offer any controls for you to do that, but even if you choose our REST API and where to try to attempt to import it, it would fail with an error. The reason for that is that you cannot create a child of a floor inside hierarchy in DNAC. Second, if you attempt to import an Ekahau project that comprises only floors at a site, it implies that you can create floors under a site, which is not allowed in DNAC site hierarchy. So this would fail as well. Third, if you attempt to import a Ekahau project containing only floors under a building, and if those floors that are planned in Ekahau project do not have the corresponding elements under the building. For instance, in this example, the Ekahau project contains the floor F3 and you are attempting to import it under a building SJC24, but the building does not have a floor F3, which would fail. And the error that you would see is that the hierarchy doesn't match. Fourth, if you have an Ekahau project that contains buildings at the top level, you cannot import it under a building inside hierarchy. For obvious reasons is that in DNAC, buildings cannot have other buildings as their children. Right? This should be obvious. Now, this another example of a failure where the site hierarchy doesn't match. If the Ekahau project contains a building and a floor, and if you seek to import it under a site where the building doesn't exist, as in this example, the top level building in Ekahau project is a B1, building B1. You're trying to import it under a site San Jose, but site San Jose does not have a building B1, hence it would fail. Now, you cannot import Ekahau project containing buildings at the top level or even floors at the top level for obvious reasons under global. Now, it's possible for you to manually create a building under global, but that's used only for pilot and lab environments. In practice, in production, buildings are seldom created under global. So we do not allow the importing of Ekahau projects under global. Now let's look at the examples of what a valid imports, a valid anchor points. We have an Ekahau project comprising only one floor, one or more floors, and you can hang it under any building as long as the corresponding floor is there under the building. So in this case, I have a project which contains a floor F1 and I'm importing it under building SJC24. And as you can see, building SJC24 contains a floor F1. You might wonder why I'm trying to import a floor when the floor already exists. Now, the constraint is that even if you're planning greenfield, the entire floor from scratch in Ekahau, you should create a placeholder floor with the same name under the building where you're trying to import this. This constraint has been relaxed in the current release, but in the releases which are in production, this must be observed. As you can see, I could have imported this project under any building as long as that building contained a floor called F1. As you can see, the project and the import mechanism does not care about which building you're trying to import a project in. It only cares about whether the flows reflected in that project are present under the building. The second example is, now you have a Ekahau project which contains a building and a floor. You can choose to import it under any site as long as that site has the building that is represented in the project and a floor as a child of that building in the site hierarchy. Again, even if you are creating this as a greenfield project, before importing the project into DNAC, you should create placeholder buildings and the floors which are required.